Ever since the FCC voted to repeal net neutrality in 2017, there's been a really large push for public broadband at the local level because a lot of people are now realizing, correctly so, that this is the way you end the net neutrality debate once and for all. If you have public broadband in your city, in the way that Chattanooga, Tennessee does, then you control it, you own it, so you don't have to worry about large multi-billion-dollar companies like Comcast or AT&T blocking or throttling content. But now that there's been this wave of momentum for public broadband, well, the individuals who were against net neutrality and who voted to kill net neutrality are starting to take notice. And one of them is FCC Commissioner Mike OReilly. Now, this is someone who did vote with Ajit Pai to kill Title II net neutrality in 2017. And here's what he has to say about municipal broadband. And it's so absurd, I think it's laughable. So as John Brodkin of Ars Technica reports, a Republican on the Federal Communications Commission claimed that municipal broadband networks pose a unique threat to First Amendment free speech rights, but provided no compelling evidence to back his claim. FCC Commissioner Michael OReilly made his claim in a speech last week at the Media Institute's Free Speech America event. OReilly said that broadband providers run by local governments, quote, have engaged in significant First Amendment mischief, but OReilly's only evidence to support his claim was the network's acceptable use policies, which contain boilerplate language similar to the policies used by private ISPs such as Comcast and AT&T. Back to the FCC, I would be remiss if my address omitted a discussion of a lesser-known but particularly ominous threat to the First Amendment in the age of the internet, state-owned and operated broadband networks, OReilly said. After criticizing the Obama-era FCC for trying to promote municipally run networks, OReilly continued, quote, in addition to creating competitive distortions and misdirecting scarce resources that should go to bringing broadband to the truly unserved areas, municipal broadband networks have engaged in significant First Amendment mischief, as Professor Enrique Armillo of the Elon University School of Law has shown in his research. Municipalities such as Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Wilson, North Carolina have been notorious for their use of speech codes in the terms of service of state-owned networks, prohibiting users from transmitting content that falls into amorphous categories like hateful or threatening. These content-based restrictions implicating protected categories of speech would never pass muster under strict scrutiny. In addition to conditioning network use upon waiver of the user's First Amendment rights, these terms are practically impossible to interpret objectively and are inherently up to the whim of a bureaucrat's discretion. How frightening. Yes, how frightening, because you know these bureaucrats who are always plotting and scheming to make a profit. Oh wait, that's actually the multi-billion-dollar companies that you hope to work for once you leave the FCC. Now, as the article states, he's conveniently omitting the fact that private ISPs also have the same type of language. The only difference is that if you find something that you don't like, well, since you own it, since the public owns it, you actually have a stake in controlling that, right? Because if you don't like the way that your city is running your broadband service, you simply petition them. You go to them, you call them, you protest. But if you don't like what Comcast does, you have absolutely no way to redress your grievances. But if you own it, if it's publicly owned, then you actually can take action to change things that you don't like. So even if what he's saying is true here, it's still not a very compelling argument because, again, if the public pays for broadband, then they own it. They have a say in what happens and how it's operated. So this is such a comically absurd critique of public broadband that I don't know how he could possibly say this with a straight face, because all he's really doing is, I don't think he's really thought about this to a really deep extent, but he's trying to pay lip service to the industries because all he's doing is making sure that he protects their profits. Because as soon as he leaves the FCC, mark my words, he's probably going to take a really lucrative job with a pretty hefty hiring bonus at one of these lobbying firms that represent AT&T or Comcast, maybe CTIA or US Telecom, or maybe he just might work directly for the industry, Verizon, AT&T, Comcast. So all he's doing is he's singing the tunes he thinks they want to hear because this guy is a sellout, he's a shill. And he's sending a message to them that, hey, no matter what, we're going to fight to make sure that your profits are protected. And this is what he's signaling to them right here. This is the message that he's trying to convey. It's not necessarily that he's trying to tell us that public broadband is a threat. It's that he's trying to tell them, his future employers, what he feels about this particular issue. Now, if you're actually trying to make a compelling argument, first of all, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So the fact that he couldn't provide that, well, not only is it not too surprising, but it's laughable. If I were in his shoes and I was trying to make some type of bullshit argument against public broadband, here's what I would say. I would frame it in this way, not to give him advice, but I'd say, look, if you end up making public broadband more common in municipalities across the country, what's going to happen? Well, that's going to kill off jobs at Comcast because obviously they're not going to be able to compete with the prices offered at the local level, so that means there's going to be a loss of jobs. Now, in actuality, what would happen is it's going to lead to a loss in profits because these private companies like Comcast would have to compete with publicly owned municipal broadband, but that's something that he could say. So if you're going to make a claim, you've got to at least try to remain in the realm of plausibility and really sanity, but instead, he makes the dumbest argument he can possibly make. Oh, well, public broadband threatens the First Amendment because what we've been seeing with, areas like Chattanooga is they've been conducting anti-First Amendment mischief. Get the fuck out of here. Look, man, Mike O'Reilly, if you're watching this, I know the FCC really likes to watch my videos. You are a fraud, you're a shill, and we all know exactly what you're doing here. You're virtue signaling to the industry because you really hope that they hire you once you leave the FCC. And I'm sure that all of this shilling for them will pay off. I'm sure you're going to be rich beyond your wildest dreams once you get out of the FCC. But understand, you're doing what citizens do not want you to do. So long as you're a bureaucrat yourself, while you denounce bureaucrats and bemoan them as if they're these ominous figures who are out to make a profit, understand that we know what you're doing. You and Ajit Pai and the other shill at the FCC, Brendan Carr, you're empowering them to do that because you don't care about consumers. You're supposed to protect consumers. The FCC is an agency that is supposed to protect consumers, but instead, they are stripping away what little protections we had for consumers, also that way Comcast and AT&T and Verizon can make more profits. Unbelievable, but understand that we're still engaged with this issue, we're still paying attention, and no matter how much you fearmonger about public broadband, that doesn't mean we're going to stop pushing for it. And in fact, bad news for you, buddy, I talked to someone who is a member of my local city council, along with the county commissioner, and they were both very enthusiastic about the idea of public broadband. So this is something that we will all be pushing for across the country, and we wouldn't have even been talking about this had you not voted to repeal net neutrality. But since you did that, and since you've left us no other options, well, we're going to push for public broadband. If you don't like this, then thank yourself, because it was your stupidity in repealing Title II that catalyzed this movement to begin with.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.